a single touch beneath your ear, and the world exhales. The air grows heavier, softer, as if time itself has slowed to listen. Somewhere deep in your chest, your heartbeat changes, not faster, not slower, just different. And in that quiet you realize it isn't only you listening, something else is listening back. We live in a world where silence is rare, almost impossible to find. Even when the room is empty, there's a noise inside us, the hum of thoughts, the weight of memory, the restlessness of a mind that's forgotten how to be still. But hidden in the folds of your own body, there is a key, not made of metal or stone, but of nerve and breath, a key that, when touched, opens a temple you didn't know existed. Long before there were cities or machines, people knew this. Monks who sat in mountain caves for days without moving, healers in desert temples, listening to the wind through stone corridors, women who sang the stars into sleep while their fingers rested gently at the curve of their neck. They all carried the same secret, that beneath the skin, just under the ear, lies a doorway. They never called it by the names we do now. They spoke of it in riddles, the silver thread, the quiet bell, the cord between the heart and the sky. Touching it wasn't just medicine, it was remembrance. The body would soften, the breath would fall into rhythm, and in that sacred pause, truth would come. You felt echoes of it before, even if you didn't recognize it. That strange calm when someone brushes past your neck, that deep sigh that comes without warning in moments of safety, that fleeting sense in the midst of chaos that you are anchored to something older than your own life. What you're about to discover isn't a trick. It's not a modern hack or a fleeting trend. It's an inheritance, something written into you before you were even born. And like all inheritances, it can be ignored or it can be claimed. Imagine your body as a vast cathedral. Every thought is a candle, every breath a prayer. Most of the time the candles flicker wildly, shadows racing across the walls. But there is a switch, hidden in the architecture, that can still the air, steady the flame, and fill the room with the pure sound of being. That switch rests quietly under your ear. If something ancient inside you has begun to stir, if the echo of that hidden temple has reached your heart, don't let it fade again. Hold on to this thread. Subscribe, not because you're curious, but because deep down you remember. The Spine Gospel will keep the door open for you. Imagine standing on the steps of an ancient cathedral, its towering pillars stretched toward the heavens, as if trying to hold up the very sky. But inside, the air feels heavy. Not with the scent of incense, but with the weight of centuries-old secrets. The same walls that once echoed with sacred chants have also witnessed whispers of doubt, political schemes, and rewritten truths. Faith, for most of us, begins as something pure. A child hears a story about miracles, divine love, or a guiding spirit, and believes it without question. But as the years pass, something changes. New voices enter the conversation. History books, science, personal heartbreaks. Faith, once a fixed star in the night sky, begins to flicker. In the early centuries of the Church, belief was not yet uniform. Different regions followed different gospels, some of which are now lost to time or deliberately hidden. The Gospel of Thomas, for instance, speaks of the kingdom of God as a realm within the self, a radical idea that threatened the growing power structures. The Gospel of Mary hints at a wisdom that women carried, a spiritual authority that was quietly erased from mainstream doctrine. These weren't fringe beliefs. They were once art of the living fabric of faith before politics drew the lines around what was true and what was heresy. And here's the unsettling part. Most of these decisions weren't purely spiritual, they were political. Councils gathered not just to pray but to vote, to decide which stories would survive and which would be condemned to silence. What began as a movement of spiritual awakening became entangled with empires and thrones. Faith was no longer just a personal journey, it was a tool of control. Think of the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. It's often portrayed as a purely theological meeting, but in reality, it was backed by the Roman Emperor Constantine, who saw unity of belief as the key to unity of empire. The result? A carefully curated version of Christianity that left out the uncomfortable parts. Stories that emphasized personal spiritual empowerment, where you didn't need a priest or an institution to meet the divine, were quietly set aside. But this didn't just happen in Christianity. Across cultures, sacred texts have been altered, edited, and shaped to serve the needs of kings, conquerors, and religious elites. The Vedas in India, the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead, even indigenous oral traditions, all have suffered from selective preservation, where the parts that threatened existing power were either softened or erased. And yet, the human spirit is stubborn. Every time the official narrative has tried to close a door, seekers have found another one. Hidden scrolls in desert caves, whispered teachings passed from one generation to another, symbols carved into stone that defy official interpretations, they all speak to a truth that refuses to be buried. Today, when we look back, we see more than just a history of belief. We see a history of editing, shaping, and sometimes breaking that belief. Faith is not static. It bends, it shifts, it's remade by the hands that hold it. This realization can be disorienting. If the stories we were told as children have been shaped by human hands, what can we truly believe? But perhaps this is where faith's deeper power begins, not in blindly accepting, but in courageously questioning, in realizing that beneath the shifting sands, there may still be a bedrock truth waiting to be uncovered. The cathedral still stands. The light still pours through its stained glass, painting the floor with colors that dance and shimmer. But now, you look at those colors differently. You wonder whose hands chose the glass, whose vision shaped the story, and what images were left out entirely. And that's when a deeper question begins to rise, not about the building or its stories, but about the unseen force that makes people return to it generation after generation. Imagine a man in his prime, broad-shouldered, steady in his stride, the kind of presence that made rooms fall silent when he entered. He'd built his life like a fortress, career, family, a carefully measured routine. Yet one ordinary morning, without warning, the fortress cracked. He found himself unable to stand, his vision swimming, his breath shallow and uneven. There was no accident, no visible wound, only the quiet betrayal of his own body. The doctors ran their tests. The heart? Normal. Lungs? Clear. Blood work? Within range. They shook their heads, perplexed. But he knew something had shifted long before the collapse. Nights had grown restless. Thoughts, once orderly, had begun to spiral in silent loops. A heaviness lived in his chest, not the heaviness of disease, but of something nameless, something the stethoscope couldn't detect. What the man didn't realize was that his collapse had been building in layers, years of swallowed words, unexpressed grief, and an unrelenting will to keep going despite the slow fraying of his inner threads. His body had been carrying his mind's unspoken burdens, and the load had reached its breaking point. This is the strange covenant between mind and body. We think of them as separate, the mind crafting dreams and strategies, the body simply executing orders. But the truth is far more entangled. When the mind speaks, the body listens, not in language, but in signals, hormones, rhythms. A thought of danger triggers the heart to race, the blood to quicken. A prolonged season of worry convinces muscles to tense, breathing to shorten. And when the mind is steeped in quiet despair, the body follows its lead, slowing digestion, sapping energy, dulling even the light in the eyes. We rarely notice this chain until it tightens around us. A subtle stiffness becomes chronic pain. A fleeting worry becomes persistent insomnia. The body's quiet alarms begin as whispers, but when ignored, they become collapses. There's a story from an old monastery where a novice monk, plagued by unshakable fatigue, asked his teacher why his body felt as heavy as stone despite no illness. The master replied, "Your body is tired because your spirit has been lifting weights your arms have never touched." The monk didn't understand, until one day while meditating, he allowed himself to finally think about the loss of his father, something he had avoided for years. As the tears came, so did a strange lightness. The heaviness in his limbs didn't vanish in an instant, but the collapse stopped threatening. His body had been waiting for permission to release the grief his mind had locked away. Science, too, affirms this ancient wisdom. Chronic stress releases cortisol in waves that slowly erode immunity, inflame joints, cloud memory. Depression alters the way the nervous system communicates with vital organs. Even unprocessed trauma, memories we don't consciously recall, can manifest in the form of migraines, digestive disorders, or autoimmune flare-ups. In other words, the mind doesn't just suggest to the body, it instructs it. And the body, loyal to a fault, obeys even harmful orders. But here is the part we often forget. If the mind can instruct the body to weaken, it can also command it to heal. Through deliberate attention, gentler thoughts, unburdened expression, and the cultivation of calm, the chain between mind and body can carry restoration instead of collapse. The man from our story eventually learned this, not from a prescription, but from slowing down enough to listen. He began journaling what he could not say aloud. He sat in stillness, not to escape his thoughts, but to meet them. He walked in the early mornings, letting the rhythm of his steps become a quiet agreement with his body. We're in this together. His fortress wasn't rebuilt overnight. But day by day, brick by brick, he learned that the body will serve the mind faithfully, but the mind must learn to be a worthy master. And sometimes, the first act of mastery is not in commanding at all, but in listening to the soft, ancient language your body has been speaking all along. Imagine walking through an ancient city where every wall is etched with symbols, every stone humming with a low, unending vibration. Now imagine, this city is you. Beneath the skin, under the subtle rise and fall of your breath, there exists a sacred place that no surgeon's knife can cut into, no microscope can fully reveal. The old mystics spoke of it as a temple of living silence, a chamber where the body's voice and the soul's longing meet. The vagus nerve is the main path to its gates, but under the ear, where bone curves and the pulse slows, lies a hidden threshold, a place that can still unlock what we have forgotten. When touched with awareness, this area does not just calm the heart or slow the breath, it opens a door to an older memory, a memory written not in words, but in sensation. In many sacred traditions, the beacon, Odie was never seen as a cage for the spirit, but as its first cathedral. The walls of this temple are your own muscles and bones, the stained glass its shimmering blood, the altar its steady heartbeat. And the priest that walks its silent aisles? That is your vagus nerve, carrying prayers in the form of impulses, delivering them to the deepest parts of your being. This is why, in moments of stillness, when you press that quiet point under the ear, something beyond thought begins to happen. You may feel a deep pull downward, as if the soul is sinking into itself. You may hear, not with your ears, but with your whole body, the slow chant of your own life force. The ancients guarded this knowledge because they understood a dangerous truth. If a human learns to enter their own temple at will, they no longer bow to temples built by other hands. They become self-initiated, sovereign, a walking sanctuary. And so the silence begins to speak back, not in riddles, not in visions, but in a knowing that has no language, a knowing that you are always here. Beneath the surface of modern science lies a forgotten blueprint, one sketched not with ink, but with symbols, chants, and ritual postures passed down through the hands of temple keepers. Civilizations as distant as Egypt, Tibet, and Mesoamerica spoke in the same coded whispers. The human body is not just a vessel, but a temple, and at its heart lies a doorway, the vagus nerve's sacred path. In ancient Egyptian scrolls, priests painted the human head with lines flowing like rivers from the ear down the neck, merging into the heart. These were not crude anatomical guesses, they were maps of energy. In the Tibetan Thangka paintings, a similar thread appears, a blue-gold current flowing from the base of the skull into the body's central channels. Even in the temples of the Mayans, carved glyphs show a priest pressing the area beneath his ear as if to speak with the gods. The ancients belied that beneath your ear rests a gate, a convergence point where breath, heartbeat, and thought meet. When touched with awareness, this point unlocks the temple's main hall, allowing the silent river to carry messages between the earthly and the divine. Modern anatomy calls it the auricular branch of the vagus nerve. They called it the listener. But why did so many cultures guard this knowledge in symbols and myths? Because they saw it as dangerous in unready hands. The temple could not be entered by those who carried noise in their hearts. One had to be prepared to empty the mind, still the breath, and align the inner pillars before pressing the hidden gate. The blueprint was never a single diagram. It was a layered puzzle, a chant to slow the pulse, a posture to release the throat, a point beneath the ear to awaken the listener. Each step was a key, and without all three, the door remained shut. And here lies the secret the ancients understood. Silence is not merely the absence of sound. It is a living presence, one that responds when called properly. To touch the gate beneath your ear is to send a signal into the temple. But whether the silence answers depends entirely on how you enter. From here, the story drifts not into myth, but into something more tangible, the way modern neuroscience unknowingly retraces this blueprint, proving that the temple was never imaginary, but alive inside each of us. The spine is more than a column of bones. It is the staff of life, the bridge between heaven and earth. In the stillness of deep breath, when the body is no longer restless and the mind no longer scattered, the true current awakens. This current is the same light that flickered in ancient temples, the same breath the prophets drew before speaking their visions. Every inhalation is an offering, every exhalation is a release. The vagus nerve hums quietly, a gold and thread between your heart and the universe, guiding you back to a place you've never truly left. When you slow your breath, you feel it, the invisible rhythm that has been there since your first heartbeat in the womb. The ancients believed that by aligning the body's pillar, the spine, and opening the gates along its length, the soul could travel without moving. This was not imagination, but a practice. The sacred postures of desert mystics, the bowed prayers of monastic orders, the still meditation of forest hermits, all preserved the same wisdom. If the spine is the bridge, breath is the traveler. It begins with awareness. Sit quietly and notice the vertical line of your body. Feel the base where you rest upon the earth and the crown that reaches for the unseen sky. With every breath, imagine a light rising up through this column, washing away the shadows, filling you with the calm strength that was always yours. Reconnection is not a grand event, it is a return to something intimate. The whisper you've ignored, the quiet call that comes between thoughts. You do not have to force it. You simply remember. The body knows, the breath knows, the spirit has never forgotten. And as this remembrance grows, the world outside softens. The chaos loses its grip. You begin to see through the noise, and what remains is simple, a living thread between you and the source, unbroken and eternal. This is not about escape, it is about presence, about standing in the center of your own being while the universe flows through you. The journey that began as a search for a hidden temple ends here, in the realization that the temple was always within your own spine, and in that temple the light is never extinguished. And so, dear traveler, we return to where our path began, standing before the silent gate, the one not made of wood or stone, but of breath, awareness, and the quiet rhythm that lives within your chest. You have walked through stories older than the mountains, crossed bridges built from both science and spirit, and touched that unseen thread, the one the ancient healers whispered of when they spoke of the Vegas, the silent messenger. But here is the truth most will never tell you. The temple you have been seeking is not far away. It is not locked. It has never been lost. It beats inside you, waiting, like a hidden flame that only asks for your attention to awaken. And perhaps the next time you close your eyes and let your breath sink deeper, you will feel it. The stillness that is not empty, the silence that hums with life, the place where the body and soul finally speak the same language. The ancients would have called it divine union. Today, you might just call it coming home. If this journey has stirred something in you, keep walking with us through the Spine Gospel. For the deeper you go, the more you will see. Nothing here is just flesh and bone. Everything, even you, is sacred.